This video is brought to you by Blinkist. The first 100 people to go to Blinkist.com/geographics will get 1 week to try it out. You'll also get 25% off if you want the full membership, which you probably will. And let's get into it. If you were to ask people to name the most famous structure in Britain, what do you think they'd reply with? The Tower of London, perhaps, or maybe Buckingham Palace, or do you think they'd pick somewhere else? Somewhere else, say, like a prehistoric stone circle out on the Salisbury plain. We're talking, of course, about Stonehenge, the greatest of Neolithic Britain's monuments. Stonehenge is so old that it even predates the pyramids. Built in the dim and distant past by a people without writing, it is as powerful today as it was back then, a monument fairly thrumming with mystery. But what was it for? Who built it? And why? And how did they transport those heavy stones all that way? Well, in this video, we're investigating the story of Northern Europe's grandest Neolithic site and its vital place in the history of modern Britain. At some point in the centuries before the Roman invasion of Britain, an ancient pagan group known as the Druids gathered on Salisbury Plain. There, as the sun of the summer solstice shone down on them, they consecrated Stonehenge, the newly built pagan temple the Celts had made for, well, at least that's the intro you might be expecting if your primary knowledge of Stonehenge comes via pop culture. In reality, Stonehenge has nothing to do with the Druids or Celts or pre-Roman Britain's pagans. And no, to shoot down another persistent theory, that's not because it was actually constructed from a pile of rubble in the late 19th or mid-20th centuries. While it might be exciting to imagine Britain's most famous monument as either a place of druidic worship or a clever fake, the actual story is far more fascinating. To tell it properly, we're going to have to travel back in time over 9,000 years. At some point between 8,500 BC and 7,000 BC, humans arrived on the Salisbury Plain. We know this because there are man-made pits in the Stonehenge area that date from this era. At least 3 of them once had wooden totem posts installed in them. Interestingly, there was nothing like this in the rest of Northern Europe. For some reason, humans living so long ago that the timescale is almost incomprehensible, they were drawn to this vast chalk plain where they established a sacred site for reasons we can never know. Okay, so now let's wind the clock forward some 4,000 years. A span of time nearly equivalent to that separating you from the pyramids swept by with nothing on the plain but those totem poles. Then, suddenly, around 3,500 BC, the area transformed. As the British Neolithic era got its groove on, new work was undertaken where those wooden totems had once stood. Long barrows, big earthen monuments, appeared. The place we now call Robin Hood's Ball was dug, a set of 2 circular ditches within which feasts or religious rites may have taken place. We can't say for certain what motivated Neolithic Britons to undertake this construction spree. It's been theorized that the plain seemed inherently mystical to them, that on an island covered with trees, this open land was as awe-inspiring to them as dense primeval forest would be to us. But we can say that these early earthenworks are likely the reason that Stonehenge exists at all, because Neolithic Britons weren't going to stop at mere ditches and long barrows. In no time at all, their descendants would transform the Salisbury Plain forever. When he wrote his 12th century history of Britain, Geoffrey of Monmout included his theory of Stonehenge's construction. 600 years earlier, he wrote, a group of Brits had been massacred on Salisbury Plain by the Saxons. To symbolize this misdeed, King Arthur's uncle, Aureoles Ambrosias, asked Merlin to bring a suitable monument there by magic. So Merlin whisked a stone circle belonging to giants away from Ireland and deposited it near Salisbury. And that was how Stonehenge came to be. Great as old Geoff's tale is, it does the original builders a bit of a disservice. Stonehenge wasn't built in a day, or even in a century. No, it was the work of millennia. Around 3000 BC, a Neolithic group with connections to Wales suddenly dug a ditch and built a bank where, until now, there had only been barrows and totem poles. Into this bank, they placed 56 pieces of bluestone, creating Stonehenge's earliest form. It's actually thanks to this bluestone that we now know the builders had Welsh connections. The stone came from the Preseli Mountains, a collection of small hills with an inflated sense of self-importance about 200 kilometers away. While there's a theory that these rocks rocks were dumped in Salisbury by retreating glaciers, it seems far more likely that they were brought here by humans. But wait! We hear you cry. How do a bunch of dudes who haven't even gotten it together to invent the wheel drag 4-ton rocks all the way from Wales? The thing is, provided a few beasts of burden, it wouldn't actually have been that difficult, especially when you consider some of the trip may have been made by floating the stones on boats downriver. And accepting these guys were connected to a huge Neolithic group in Wales makes a lot of other stuff make sense. Take the cremations. We know that people's cremated remains were buried around the 56 slabs of bluestone. Genetic tests in 2018 showed that many of these long-dead dudes hailed from Wales. Like the bluestones, they may well have arrived by boat. 1.6 kilometers from our proto-Stonehenge, on the banks of the river Avon, sat a small version called Blue Stonehenge. Today it's thought that corpses were burned there before their burial. Were you to randomly step out of a time machine at this point, you probably wouldn't even recognize Stonehenge. The bluestones didn't have tops or lintels lying across them like you're used to seeing. This was Stone Circle 101, the sort of thing any bunch of semi-motivated Neolithic hicks could just knock up. It would take another 500 years for the Stonehenge of legend to appear. Around 2500 BC, the site's caretakers abruptly got the building bug again. The huge pillars of stone you associate with Stonehenge were dragged 32 kilometers from Amesbury, each weighing around 25 tons. At the Bluestone Circle, they were pounded smooth with hammers and then carved until their tops made dovetail joints. Finally, they were hauled upright using rope, and the heavy stone lintels, those horizontal bits that rest on top, were moved into place. It was a massive operation, absolutely huge. We know this because a workers' village was discovered in the mid-2000s just 3 kilometers away, with space for almost 1,000 dwellings. It was likely the largest construction site Neolithic Britain had ever seen, possibly even the whole of northern Europe. Finally, around 2740 BC, a 3-kilometer ceremonial avenue was added, connecting the newly built henge to the river Avon, parts of the route aligned to the summer solstice sunrise. But Neolithic Britain's greatest architectural triumph would be also its last. In just a few short centuries, the ancient people that had built Stonehenge were destined to just vanish completely. Now, one thing you don't have to worry about vanishing is your knowledge, because you can use Blinkist. Now, look, it's not always easy to find the time to sit down and read all the books you want. I'm a pretty busy dude myself, so I understand that, and I just don't read as much as I used to, and honestly, as much as I would like to. But good news, I have Blinkist, which is this app that you can download, and then it's basically 15-minute summaries of the best non-fiction books. They've got over 3,000 of them. You can read, or you can listen. Generally, I prefer to listen. I fire it up on my commute to work, I pop it on, and I have a little 15-minute listen. It's pretty great. 8 million people currently using this app to get the best insights and need-to-know info from thousands of books. Self-help, to business, to health, whatever you're into, it's on there. They also have excellent curated lists where the Blinkist team and also guests to put together specific recommendations like how to future-proof yourself or just some of their favorites. I'm looking at what I've been going through recently. I went through Factfulness. I'm about halfway through that. I think I wasn't listening this morning, but yesterday morning on my way to work. And then The Snowball by Warren Buffett, which is a great book, also super long, but condensed into 15 minutes. That's just a few of them. I got loads of stuff on here. The first 100 people to go to Blinkist.com/geographics, you had a week to try it out, and you'll also get 25% off if you want the full membership. Again, for the first 100 people, 7 days for free, Blinkist.com/geographics. And let's get back to the video. Around 2750 BC, something happened on the Iberian Peninsula that would change Europe forever. The first humans were buried with pottery drinking vessels known as Bell-Beaker cups. It may not sound like much, but these cups marked the emergence of one of Neolithic Europe's great cultures, the Beaker Folk. And no, sadly, this wasn't a race of people who looked exactly like Beaker from the Muppets. For a long time, scientists argued over whether they were even a race at all. In the centuries after the Bell-Beaker cups appeared in Iberia, they swept across Europe, leading many to conclude that the pottery was a sign of technology transfer rather than immigration. But in 2018, genetic testing revealed a bit more of a complex story. While not all Beaker folk were related, there was a huge Beaker monoculture that emerged in Central Europe. Originally from the Eurasian Steppe, these Beaker folk were fair-haired, blue-eyed, and pale-skinned. dark-skinned, and it wouldn't be long before they completely overran ancient Britain. Not that this was the first time a bunch of outsiders had taken over the island. Those Mesolithic guys we opened our story with, the ones who stuck wooden totems into pits near modern Stonehenge 9,000 years ago, well, those guys, the original Britons, had themselves been completely replaced around 4000 BC by a bunch of Aegean farmers. It was these Aegeans who'd brought the Neolithic era to Britain and got it together to build Stonehenge. Now they, in turn, were destined to be replaced. As far back as 2200 BC, you have signs of Beaker culture on the Salisbury plain. This was when the wealthy Amesbury Archer was buried near Stonehenge, his grave replete with Bell-Beaker cups. Within a few centuries, his fellow Beakers had pushed Neolithic Britons to the brink of extinction. Not long after, Stonehenge's golden age finally ended. 4 centuries after the Amesbury Archer was buried, 2 circles of ring pits were dug around Stonehenge. It's likely they were intended to hold yet more standing stones, but those stones were never laid. For whatever reason, construction work on Stonehenge ended with the Beaker takeover of Britain. Still, it's clear the site retained at least some of its original importance. As late as 700 BC, the Iron Age Celts were building a fort overlooking Stonehenge. So yes, Druids probably really did hang out around these ancient stones. We know, too, that the Romans showed an interest in Stonehenge because they left a crap ton of their pottery lying about the place. After that, though, they get a bit hazy. By the medieval period, most knowledge of Stonehenge had been lost. It was just a weird place sitting on a southern landscape, a bit of history that no one could really quite remember. But this obscurity, it wasn't destined to last. The medieval period was just when Britons were starting to become interested in their own past. It wouldn't be long before Stonehenge found itself at the epicenter of English life once again. There's a weird misconception that Stonehenge was lost until the modern era, like you could just misplace a gigantic stone circle. But go looking at medieval sources, and you'll see that people have been fascinated by it for hundreds of years. In 1129, Henry of Huntingdon named Stonehenge the second of England's 4 great wonders, writing that stones of remarkable size are raised up like gates in such a way that gates seem to be placed on top of gates, and no one can work out how the stones were so skillfully lifted up to such a height or why they were erected there. Well, almost no one could work it out. This was the same period when Geoffrey of Monmouth was deciding that the answer was, well, Merlin did it, a theory people would believe for hundreds of years. Wacky old Jeff aside, it's clear that medieval writers were just as befuddled by Stonehenge as we are, albeit in a different way. While back then there were arguments about whether it was built by Druids or giants, today we debate if Stonehenge was a burial site, an ancient observatory, or a place for healing the sick. That's not to say everything is guesswork, though. There's lots of evidence that hints in certain directions, and plenty of seriously clever people have come to some seriously clever theories. But with stuff like whether the blue stones were placed there as a form of ancestor worship, or whether they were political gifts to bind 2 large Neolithic tribes, we can't really say. In the end, all we can do is look at the evidence and hope that 1,000 years from now, our conclusions don't look as silly as blaming everything on wizards. As the medieval period slowly gave way to the early modern period, fascination with Stonehenge, it only grew. In the 1570s, Flemish artist Lucas de Heere painted the largest, most accurate image of the henge for his guidebook to Britain, looking eerily similar to how it does today. Not 50 years later, George Villiers, the first Duke of Buckingham, went to dig up the centre of Stonehenge, convinced that there was treasure buried there. Spoiler alert, there was not. But Villiers' expedition was unusual in that it was purely about personal gain. Most other visitors wanted to understand the stones, not loot them. Take Inigo Jones. The great architect visited in the mid-17th century, observed the symmetry of the design, and came away convinced it was a Roman temple. In 1655, his posthumous tract on the subject even declared that the name Stonehenge was a vulgar piece of barbarianism, and Stonehenge was really evidence of Rome's architectural might. But not everyone was down with Jones's ideas. Others spent the best years of their lives trying to prove that it really was the Vikings who were responsible. One theory, though, would prove more durable than most. At the very end of the 17th century, the great antiquarian John Aubrey made his way to Stonehenge and conducted the first proper survey of the site in history. It was Aubrey who found the 56 holes those Welsh bluestones had once stood in. It was Aubrey who realised Jones was talking out of his be-pantalooned backside about the Romans. No, it was clear to an expert like Aubrey that whoever built Stonehenge had predated the Romans likely by hundreds of years. Unfortunately, the only known peoples to fit the bill in those days were the Celts, so Aubrey just came right out and declared Stonehenge was the work of the Druids. And that's why, over 300 years later, there are still people convinced that Stonehenge was all about paganism. And so now we come to what is undoubtedly the weirdest sentence in our video. The fact that Stonehenge is a tourist attraction today may come down entirely to a set of curtains. On September the 21st, 1915, Cecil Chubb's wife asked him to go to an auction at the Palace Theatre in Salisbury to buy a set of matching curtains. A working-class boy who'd studied hard and wound up becoming a wealthy barrister, Chubb was a well-known figure around Wiltshire. Yet, even he probably couldn't have realised how notorious he was about to become. That day, Chubb attended the auction as his wife had told him to do. But rather than focus on the curtain sets, he found his mind captivated by Lot 15. There, before his very eyes, the firm Messrs. Knight, Franck and Rutley was putting Stonehenge under the hammer. As he'd later tell the story, Chubb became convinced that a wealthy American millionaire would buy Stonehenge, have it dismantled and shipped to the US, just as would happen to London Bridge decades later. So convincing was his fear that Chubb decided to hell with the curtains, and he put all of his available cash into bidding on the monument. By the time the hammer fell on Lot 15, Cecil Chubb was £6,600 poorer, but the legal owner of Stonehenge. And yes, we'd love to see the expression on Chubb's wife's face when he returns home, not with a set of velvet curtains, but with the title to a prehistoric site. Sadly, that priceless moment has been forever lost to history. That Chubb was able to buy Stonehenge sounds crazy to our modern ears, but his wildcard bid did not come out of the blue. By 1915, Stonehenge had been in private hands for the best part of 1,000 years. At some point in the Middle Ages, a Benedictine abbey was built near Stonehenge, which used the land around for husbanding animals. When Henry VIII decided he wanted a divorce so badly he was willing to smash up England's links with the Catholic Church to get it, Stonehenge was confiscated from the abbey and given to a private owner. Yes, it seems weird to us too that a 4,000-year-old ruin could become someone's property, but, well, there you have it. Anyway, by the 1820s, the henge had passed into the hands of the aristocratic Antrobus family, a bunch of toffs who loved private property rights and hated preserving ancient monuments. In the century that they owned it, Stonehenge fell into disrepair, culminating in one of the upright stones simply falling over in 1900, taking its top lintel down with it. The damage to the site led to public outcry for the government to step in and use the Ancient Monuments Protection Act to, protect an ancient monument. Unfortunately, the act required the permission of the landowner, and Sir Edmund Antrobus considered the idea of the British government preserving British monuments for the British people as outrageous as a pair of bacon underpants. Instead, a fence went up around the site in 1901, and people who couldn't pay were kept far, far away. But fate was about to take Stonehenge out of the hands of the Antrobus family forever. In the summer of 1914, the assassination of an archduke in Sarajevo led to the whole of Europe marching to war. That October, the current Sir Edwin Antrobus was killed on the Western Front. Because he died childless, there was no one to take over the family land, so his more distant relatives decided to just sell the lot, including Stonehenge. Fast forward almost a year, and the auction of the Antrobus lands ended with Cecil Chubb walking out of Salisbury Palace Theatre with the deeds to Stonehenge. But if Chubb thought the tale was going to end there, he had another thing coming. On June the 13th, 1917, death came droning out of the skies over London. In broad daylight, 20 German planes descended over the city, dropping bombs onto shops, homes, and businesses. The explosions that tore through the British capital that day killed 162 civilians, including 18 children at a school. It was the first modern blitz that the city experienced. It was a foretaste of the carnage Hitler would unleash over 2 decades later. And there was no way the British could leave such a brazen attack unanswered. Within hours of the London bombing, orders went out to build an airfield for developing and training long-range British bomber squadrons. The site they chose for this experimental airfield? Yep, you guessed it, that was Stonehenge. I mean, it's pretty odd, but all is fair in love and war, and this certainly was the biggest war Britain had ever seen. That same year, a giant airfield sprang into existence just a few hundred meters from Stonehenge. There are images from the time showing aircraft hangars sat where now there's just nothing but fields, composite postcards depicting biplanes zooming over the stones themselves. It's easy to imagine an alternate history where some accident leads to a plane smashing into the rocks, permanently damaging them, or maybe one where the military simply requisitions Cecil Chubb's land and keeps it forever off limits. Luckily, though, this reality turned out different. By late 1918, the war was winding down, and it was clear that Germany was not going to be the winner. With planned air raids on Berlin cancelled, the Stonehenge aerodrome began slowly shutting up shop. It was at this point that Cecil Chubb finally made his move. On October the 26th, 1918, Chubb gifted Stonehenge to the nation, making it forever public property. Not that this was an entirely selfless gesture. For his generosity, Chubb was given a knighthood. That same year, the Ministry of Works took over the site. Over the next 12 months, and again in the 1950s, they undertook extensive restoration, lifting fallen lintels back up, shoring up some stones with concrete. If you've stumbled across the internet hoax claiming Stonehenge was secretly built in the 20th century, this is probably where the pictures came from. The ministry really did haul several fallen stones back upright, including the biggest ones of all. But while there's always a healthy argument to be had about when restoration is appropriate, to claim Stonehenge was built in the 20th century is a stretch too far, even for Mr. Fantastic. Fast forward to today, and Stonehenge is likely the most famous site in the whole of Britain. Hell, it's probably one of the most famous sites in the world, right up there with the pyramids and the Taj Mahal. Yet Stonehenge still has something those other places will never have, an air of mystery. We will never know why Mesolithic hunter-gatherers first decided to start digging pits on the Salisbury plain, why they suddenly got it into their heads to set up wooden totems on the site. We'll likely never know too why the Aegean farmers who replaced them started building bigger structures in that same area, culminating in Stonehenge itself. These were cultures without writing, cultures who left behind no memory. The ancient Egyptians at least had hieroglyphics which we can try to find and decode. The builders of Stonehenge, they left no record of any kind. Nothing but the henge itself, as awe-inspiring today as it was 4,500 years ago. The people who made it may be long gone, but Stonehenge itself will continue to stand into the far distant future, outlasting our skyscrapers, our countries, maybe even the human race itself. We may not know why it was built, but we can still appreciate Stonehenge, the greatest Neolithic monument of them all. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below and don't forget to subscribe. And do go over and check out our fantastic sponsor, Blinkist. I'm going to link to them below. And thank you for watching.